just get through this, okay? Great. There's a lot of talk at the moment about the need for an economic stimulus. The reason is, of course, that the coronavirus shutdowns have caused some services to stop, as well as big changes to how and what we buy. Yeah, because people don't want to spend their money on fun get-a-virus holidays or buy tickets to mass infection festivals.
Women's auxiliary bark all over the benevolent order of antelopes.
When money's not being spent, there are businesses that cease to trade, and then those businesses lay off workers who in turn do not spend money in the economy. Yeah, it totally looks like an economic death spiral, but politicians prefer softer terms. They'll tell you the economy's looking sluggish. History has taught us that if governments don't intervene while this is happening, it will lead to a depression. In 1929, the American stock market collapsed, and with it, lots of investors lost their savings. As a result, investments dropped, people stopped spending their money. And across the world, industrial activity went into decline and companies laid off workers in their thousands. It was the biggest economic catastrophe in world history, and the effects lasted for 10 years. One of the reasons why things got so bad back then was that economic thinking was trapped in this false idea that running a national budget is like running a household budget, and if you've got less money coming in, you should just spend less. But the brilliant British economist John Maynard Keynes realised that if governments cut spending, there'd be even less money circulating through the economy, and they'd be making the problem worse. Keynes understood that unlike a household, a government can't run out of money. They always have the capacity to borrow more money, and they always have the capacity to service their debts. Keynes's remedy for the economic crisis was that if the government spent money of its own creating jobs, the people who had those jobs would start spending in the economy again. Markets would bloom around them to sell them things, and more jobs would therefore be created, meaning that more tax revenue from jobs and economic activity would flow back to the government. During the Great Depression, Australian governments did not follow Keynes' advice. Our governments cut spending, and the result was that 30% of Australians became unemployed. It was the second highest rate of unemployment in the world. Then, in 1939, Australia found itself at war. And when the Australian government didn't hesitate to spend its money defending Australia, surprise, the economy recovered. During World War II, the Labor government of John Curtin started planning for the peacetime to come and an economy that would be based around John Maynard Keynes' ideas. They realised that while they were developing jobs in things like public housing and infrastructure and research and services, they'd also be helping to make Australia a much stronger and richer country. And that's exactly what we became.
Why? These Australians are more Keynesian than I am.
The challenge we have as we recover from coronavirus is that even though an economic stimulus is desperately needed, the government we have, Scott Morrison, the Liberals, the Nationals, they're not Keynesians. They prefer a different economic philosophy. Neoliberals believe that government shouldn't intervene in the economy and that economic decisions are best left to those sane, sound, sober, rational minds in the business community. So rather than spend money directly creating jobs, what they do is things like give out tax cuts to the business community. The idea being that if businesses are making more money and have larger profits, they themselves might, when they feel like it, get around to, if the circumstances are appropriate, creating some jobs. And yes, this is exactly the same argument that was made when penalty rates were cut, and it's the same argument that was made to justify billions of dollars in corporate tax cuts last year, and it's the same argument that the Liberal government use whenever anybody says, hey, why don't we raise Australian wages? Neoliberals also don't like Keynesianism because any infrastructure that gets built becomes government-owned, and they see government-owned enterprise as being in competition with corporate interests. And they don't like creating public service jobs because public servants tend to unionise and put in claims for better wages and conditions, and this puts pressure on corporations to improve the conditions and wages they offer their own workers. But the impact of coronavirus is so serious that whether they like it or not, the Liberal government of Scott Morrison have to do something for the economy, and soon. So we can have a neoliberal stimulus and again prioritise the interests of business, or we can have a Keynesian stimulus and put pressure on the government to create the jobs that we want to see in the community. Ultimately, it's a political decision, and which direction Australia goes in is up to you.